Welcome to Talking Tech Journeys, hosted by me, Ben Whiteley of BPM Tech. We're delighted to bring you season 1 of Talking Tech Journeys. The aim is clear: to bring you some of the most engaging and respected figures within tech and transformation, providing a snapshot of their journeys to share knowledge, ideas, and insights on all things tech and transformation. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the journey. Hi, welcome to Talking Tech Journeys. I'm Ben Whiteley and delighted to be joined by Thomas Knox, co-founder and CEO of VitVio, a computer vision and AI company for surgical operating rooms that will increase efficiency, ROI, and safety. Hi, Thomas. Thanks for joining. How are things?
Very good. Thank you very much, Ben. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good. Well, look forward to exploring your views on AI and computer vision and exploring your background and journey to health tech entrepreneur. So let's sort of take you back then. How, why, when did you sort of first become interested in technology and healthcare?
I took a really, let's say, not so straight path to get here. A bit of my background is that over the last decade or so, I've had the absolute pleasure to be a part of quite a few hypergrowth startups that have kind of gone from that 0 to billion mark or very quickly approaching it. For example, one of the first places where I cut my teeth was in a company called Kiwi.com. If you've ever heard of it, it's an online travel company similar to Skyscanner or Kayak. It was number 3 rated for the last couple of years, but actually Forbes just named it number 1 this year. And went in there working out of the CEO's a converted apartment in the early days with 15 other people. And then over the span of 3.5 years, we went from 15 people to 3,000 people. We went from doing $500,000 a year to $1 billion a year. It was absolutely crazy times. I did a couple other things in between, but probably most relevant to what we do at VitVio is I was also head of product for a company called iFi, which guaranteed nobody's ever heard of. But what it does, they probably know what we do, is autonomous stores. So if you know Amazon Go, Amazon Fresh is what it's called in the UK, the concept most people are familiar with. And iFi is actually Amazon's number 1 competitor in that space. It actually is the world's largest vendor for autonomous stores. But the reason that you never hear about it is what we're doing is white labeling it and selling it to these big retailers like Aldi, Carrefour, so on and so forth. And actually there's a couple of football clubs in the UK now that are have the technology deployed as well. But and that's kind of how I grew my expertise and passion for technology. But then there was a bit of a, let's say, difficult situation that occurred that made me really reevaluate a lot of my life path. About 2.5 years ago, my father, who I was very close with, passed away very suddenly due to heart failure. Just one day he was there, one day he was gone. And that hit me really hard, and it made me do a lot of self-reflection and say, even though I'm very proud of the things that I've done, and I'm really happy to have been a part of those exciting technology advancements, it made me realize that I didn't look at myself and say, hey, this is something I've done something that when I'm on my deathbed, I'll look back and be really proud I did this and glad that I had a material impact on people's lives. And that's kind of what spun off VitVio. So this made me start looking into the healthcare space and look at the challenge that we're facing. And with aging populations, rising costs, lack of medical staff, and a backlog of nearly 8 million people in the UK and a country of 60 million, it was a very clear place where there's a lot of help needed, and the healthcare space has been lagging behind technologically for quite a while. So this was a logical place, but that wasn't where we came up with the idea of VitVio as it is today. It was just okay, I want to sit down and start looking at what we can do. And not a lot of people know this, but 40% of a hospital's expenses go through the operating theater. In the US, it's even higher on the revenue side. It's about 60 to 70% of the revenue, and everything kind of circles around the operating theater. So this was a place where it was kind of natural to start giving it a look and seeing how we can help there.
Yeah. So I know you've you've touched on it just briefly there from a sort of release, innovation, product sort of background. And in terms of, and I know you sort of co-founded various sort of product communities, Product Tank, chair of the product manager of Forbes Technology Council. So, I mean, what sort of influence has that sort of had on your career today?
Massively. I mean, there's two ways that you can learn. You can either learn by failing, which I believe very strongly, like you got to fail to know what to avoid and how to do better next time, or you can learn through other people's lessons. So this is where I really started to, because I was, at a very early age, the Kiwi stuff when I was talking to you, I started that at 19. I didn't go to college. I bypassed that and went straight into the startup world. So for me, I had to learn fast and do a lot of failing. So if anybody's listening to this from those early days, I'm really, really sorry, but I promise things are better now. No, what I did is I founded these communities as a way to share my lessons and my failures and my successes as well, but also to hear other people's stories. And I started it. I was at the time I was living in Czech Republic in a town called Brno, which is the second largest city. And I started this community, and it just took off. And actually, that product tank, it's called Product Tank Brno, is actually the third largest product tank in the world right now, with over 1,000 members. So it grew really crazy. So whenever you see like the list of product tanks, you have like London, San Francisco, Dubai, and Brno, which most people have never heard of the name before. And that had a massive impact on me learning as quickly as I could from as many people as I could and sharing my lessons with them. And on top of that, just built some amazing friendships, deep friendships and connections that I couldn't ever replace.
Yeah, no, that's great, and it's obviously good to get a bit of a background and context as to your drivers, motivators, but ultimately we're here to talk about the sort of here and now, which you sort of touched on in terms of VitVio and where you are today. So I know obviously, like say about the Sad Life event that sort of changed the focus. Obviously, in terms of sort of computer vision AI, are you able to just sort of take us back to 2023 when you founded the business and ultimately what computer vision is and how it sort of feeds into AI?
Yeah, so maybe I'll talk about what we do at VitVio first, just to set the stage for people who are not necessarily aware of that, and then I'll tie that back into how we got there. So first off, for those of you who don't know VitVio or first time hearing about it, what we do at VitVio is we essentially go into surgical operating theaters. We deploy, let's say, 5 to 10 cameras into the ceiling, maybe a weight sensor or two if need be. We try to do most things visually. And we start tracking all the people, equipment, fixtures, fittings, processes, you name it. Now, at the intersection of that data, you can find a lot of interesting insights and context to understand the processes, right? And for example, what we do is we track like the stage of the surgery. Has the patient arrived? Have they gone under anesthetic, knife to skin, so on and so forth? And when you know that, you're able to do things like create runway estimates, like how long is left till the surgery is finished, or parallelize activities, like when you get to the last 20 minutes of surgery, trigger off an automatic notification to the preoperative nursing staff to start prepping the next patient, so that as soon as you wheel out that patient, you're wheeling in the next one. The whole goal of this is to drive operational efficiency inside of the operating theater. Now, there's other things we do around like, tracking tool usage and wastage and providing like, insights for how to improve both, and safety aspects. But, right now, for the early stage, we're really focused on the efficiency aspects because every hospital is really in need of that. Now, how did we get here? Healthcare in general is something, as I kind of alluded to earlier, is an industry that's, generally lagging behind a little bit technologically for good reason. They have to think of the span of decades, right? And they have to think about patient safety and lives, the lives are at stake. So what they start to do is they start to look at other industries to set the stage for what technology is proven versus what technology is not. Now, this was a really interesting idea because when we came into this and we started looking at the operating theater and hearing about this, we did hundreds of interviews with doctors before we ever even came up with an idea. Typical product manager way, I want to tell me your problems before I tell you a solution. We just heard over and over again about the operating theater and the challenges they're facing and how there's a lack of transparency. So then we started looking at, okay, what solutions can we drive here? And it just happened to be that it's actually a really good place to deploy computer vision technology. Now, computer vision technology is something that, I think that they would be a lot more hesitant towards if there wasn't some really big things that occurred in the last few years. And I would tie it maybe into 3 different pieces. First one is validation from other markets. So validations with the autonomous retail space. I was able to go into these hospitals and say, hey, you don't understand the technology. Why don't I take you down to one of these autonomous stores and show you it working in practice, and you can understand the concept of it. We're not doing the exact same thing. It's not the same models, but you understand the idea of humans tracked in space, to understand activities, to understand what items they're using and so on. And the concept is there, right? Then I think the second piece is COVID. COVID had a massive change on the old guard realized, stepped away. A lot of the new guys realized, this is a really hard time. The old ways of working are not working anymore, and they can't
Yeah.
catch up. And there was a mass exodus of staff. So this has been a big challenge every hospital is facing. And I think the third piece, which has also been really critical to us, and we're building some partnerships there as well, is robotic surgery. Robotic surgery is starting to get its foothold in the surgical space and prove that it's extremely valuable in certain use cases. And a lot of that is based on computer vision technologies. So when I come in and I talk to them about this, it's not something that they're completely foreign or like is completely foreign to them or that they don't understand the concept, maybe in a slightly different way, but it's still something that they pretty have a clear understanding of.
No, well, that's interesting how it's sort of evolved over time. And in terms of sort of like you've just touched on, the barriers that exist around innovation and AI with health and social care. I mean, you've mentioned some of that, how you sort of overcome it, but is there a particular key that sort of unlocks those sorts of barriers and can drive, whether it be NHS trials? I know you sort of working with businesses across the US. How's that sort of evolved over time?
Yeah, right now we're working with a couple NHS pilots where we're in the midst of deployment now and contract negotiations with a couple others. In the US, we're talking to 7 out of the top 15 hospitals. So things are going very well and moving quickly for us, especially because we're 6 months old basically. It's very rare to see it move that quickly. That being said, the biggest challenge with the NHS is just it moves very slowly. And like I said before, they think in the span of decades and they want to survive, centuries, millennia, right? But the problem is that startups, especially VC-backed startups, you have to think in the span of 2 years, your next funding cycle. And that's just the reality of it, which means you have 2 years to either prove it or you die. And that's just that's the reality. And that's always a difficult one because you're trying to balance the speed at which the NHS especially moves versus your runway, right?
Sure.
And one of the big challenges we see is just that there's I think maybe I would call it like technical acumen or understanding is like some hospitals don't even know that these things are potentially possible. And and I think that you can't come in and just tell them, here's a cool tech. You need to come in and say, here's a cool tech that also has proven benefits. And in our case, even though I couldn't come in and say I have like case studies where I have done this at hospitals yet, what I was doing is relating it back to third-party peer-reviewed journals. We had a quick chat before this, and I was telling you we're a bunch of nerds that like to read read scientific papers. So we had hundreds of scientific papers where people like the operating theater efficiency isn't a new problem. It's a problem that's been very well studied in academia, but doing fixes manually. And we were able to say, hey, this is proven manually. I just want to automate what they've already proven manually, and that's a much easier way to sell it. I think the other way is the biggest thing that changed the game for us to getting in fast was finding champions. So going on LinkedIn or going to events and just writing or talking to people and saying, I need to know who are the really innovative people in the NHS that have high positions that I can get their insights. And if you can get them bought in, those guys, if they're at a high position and truly innovative, you'll be surprised how fast they'll push you and connect you to all these C-level hospitals, and they already have spent a career building their reputation, right? Granted, you have to make it worth I don't mean worth their while financially, but worth their while as in they need to trust you that when they put that, they're not putting their name at risk. So there is a lot of work on that side. But once you've done that, they're very open because I think anybody who goes in the NHS doesn't do it for the money. They do it for wanting to help people. So if, as long as they feel that you're going to have an impact there, they'll move mountains to make it happen as well.
Good. So, I mean, you've given us a good insight there into sort of, health tech startup. I mean, it'd be really interesting just to sort of elaborate a bit further on how you juggle and prioritize, minimal viable products. You've sort of touched on robotic surgery, your trials, your case studies, your evidence, how you adhere to laws, standards, legislation, investment, and
never sleep. No, I mean, the reality is, this comes with any startup, is the team that you build is the most important aspect of any company, especially in the early days. I am lucky to have surrounded myself with people who are absolute geniuses, who are some of the most hardworking people that I've ever met, who inspire me. And I consider myself a pretty driven person, and these guys are like, bar none, like way more driven, way smarter than I am. And I'm just very lucky to be surrounded by people like this, who have relevant experience as well to bring to the table, and an excitement for having something that's very impactful. Now, what I would say here is that, there's no golden, silver bullet. I think it's like,
sure.
there's no like easy way to move through this stuff. I think the whole point is that you just have to look at like, what is going to get me the proof that I need to, like, look at when you're talking to a hospital and they say, we like this, it sounds cool, it sounds great, but like, here's our holdup. Whether that be financial or whether that be, case study, or you'll hear this a lot, is we're happy to be number 2. We don't want to be number 1. Like, find out what their like motivators are, and then try to work ruthlessly on getting those motivators over the line. You know what I mean? And that's really how we've been able to move things along and progress quickly and remove blockers.
Good. So, I mean, in terms of where you're at now, but sort of the future within sort of surgical operating rooms, health and social care, what does the future hold for AI and computer vision? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think AI is such a general term. It's really hard to say, because it could be, you're going to look at, honestly, systems are going to be completely end-to-end driven by AI in, the next decades. But, I think you're going to see that at stages, right? And one of the stages I think that you'll see as the first ones is going to be operational AI. So not clinical, like clinical AI is moving, but it takes a really long time because you have a direct impact on a patient's outcomes, right? So, and rightfully so, it needs to go through very stringent processes. But for example, at VitVio, one of the first things that we did is, even though there's a lot of things we can do on the clinical aspects, we've squarely avoided that and focused more on operations. Right. How can I help with the operations? Because once you're in and you have that data, it's just how do you use that data? And that's a lot, that's a very different process. And you can take the time, because then you have a sustainable business that's like, you can build and take the time to get the clinical certifications. So that's kind of the path we take. Now, what I can say is, from our technology, where we're going, and where I see AI in hospitals having a massive impact, is I think, the idea that anybody in a hospital has to interact with an EHR system, with their like record systems manually, is just ridiculous. Like the fact they spend, I mean, there's a study that's saying they spend almost 40% of their day on an EHR system logging data, is ridiculous. What I want to do is, we're starting with the operating theater, but we see this as like a piece of a larger puzzle, and you have to start somewhere. You can't boil the ocean. But our plan is to kind of, start in the OR, because it's the crux of all of the information flow, but then start looking at how do we go horizontally across that patient flow to start taking away all of the manual data inputs through that line, so we can get hospital staff focused on what they are trained and what their specialty is for, which is the patient. Not logging data in EHR. I don't need to know that you're coming to the operating theater. I can track the table to know that it's on its way there, and I can know who's assigned to that. Then I know that when it's going to arrive. I can even predict the estimation of the time that it'll take to get there. There's things like this that we'll be working on piece by piece. And I think what you'll see is hospitals in, I don't know if it'll be a decade, probably more than that, but some of the hospitals will have it that way in a decade. You'll see that they don't need to log anything in the EHR. They focus on the patient and focus on delivering the best possible care. Things are just running smoothly in the background, and that the people are arriving where they need to be at the right time. And then, that's kind of the best case scenario. That's where I want to get to. That's where I think, our medical systems are currently under immense stress, and the staff inside of them even worse. So these people need the help, and they need to get focused on what's their specialty and what they got into it for. They didn't get into it to log data into an EHR.
True. Yeah. Well, like I said, it can help with the admin backlog, and
exactly.
Stop the runway.
Take away the boring stuff.
Yeah, that's it. I know you've touched on it briefly, but sort of tools wastage and things like that, the costs associated, not just physical pound notes, but sort of the environmental costs. Are you able just to sort of elaborate a bit further in terms of what you found from that perspective?
Yeah, so tool wastage. So for example, the gold standard today in hospitals, like, whether you're in New York, London, Singapore, it doesn't matter. The gold standard is barcode scanning. So they have a surgical tray that comes in, they scan the barcode, they know what's inside the tray, which is great for telling you what came into the theater, but not what is actually being used. And the problem is that, it's a little bit better in the UK, because UK, they use a lot of standardized trays. But for example, in the US, there's been studies, they have these, what they call the surgeon's preference card. And the surgeon's preference card is a unique tray for every surgeon. Like a lot of hospitals in the US are using this. But the problem is that it's a very additive process. Once you put something on it, you know that it's there, but you don't know how much is actually being used, or is it just sitting there not being used because they needed it on a surgery 4 years ago? And the only way to check that is to have somebody stand in the room with a clipboard and write down every time that they are using that tool. And that's as you can imagine, a very, very heavy process. Now, there was some studies done on this in the US, and one of the studies suggested that it was up to 60% of the tray is like that. So
Wow.
yeah. So it's not a small problem. It's a very big problem. And the thing is that this is literally costing, like, for example, there's a study done in 2019 by Dr. Claudia Rosales, who's actually one of our advisors, and one of the first papers that inspired us to go in this direction. She was a professor at Michigan State with a bunch of PhD students, and they came to the conclusion that there's about $1.4 million of wastage per operating theater in the United States per year. Yeah. So you can imagine it's a huge problem. There's $50 billion across the US with 36,000 ORs. So this is one piece. But now to touch on the carbon aspects you talk about. Is most hospitals and all of us should be thinking about the impact of the environment, what we're doing there to improve that, and how to get more green and sustainable. Think about this. Those tools, I'm not going to say 60%, but let's just say a large percentage of the tray is hypothetically not actually being used in the surgeries. Now, these tools, because they're used in such a, they have to stay very sharp, and they have to be top quality to not risk the patient. They have a lifespan. So they usually have a lifespan, let's say 15 to 20 surgeries before they either have to be resharpened, which is a pretty heavy manual intensive process, or they have to be just disposed of and bought a new one. Now, I'm just going to run you through the life cycle of one of these tools that potentially isn't being used. It gets put on a tray, brought in the OR, open the tray. Now that it's been opened, it has to be re-sterilized, gets sent to re-sterilization, which sometimes is not in the hospital. They often do off-site sterilization, where they have a big semi-truck come in, take all the sterilization somewhere else, re-sterilize everything, pack it all back up, bring it back, just to do that 15 more times until it gets thrown away. That is a massive carbon impact, both for the tool itself and the time and expense and the power that went into getting it there in the first place. Then all of that process of putting it in there, driving it back and forth multiple times. There's a huge carbon impact on it just for one of these tools. You can imagine a tool could be driving literally 1,000 miles just to never be used.
Crazy. I mean, so there's obviously a lot of benefits. I mean, just thinking in terms of some of the sort of pushbacks or potential concerns from clinicians, surgeons, ultimately allowing, the cameras, computer vision, AI, algorithms into a live surgical operating theatre. Was that sort of, or is that still a challenge and pushback?
I would say when we created this, it was our number one fear. Like it was you could create we were like, oh, what if we create the perfect product, but nobody wants to use it because they're scared, And I'm not going to lie to you and say that there's not a tiny bit of that, but most of that is surgeons and surgical teams don't want to be micromanaged. But there's a really good aspect is hospitals don't want to micromanage, because hospitals want to keep their staff happy. The hospitals want to improve the efficiency without scaring their staff. So that it completely depends on how you plan to use it and the commitment of both your company and of the hospital that you're working with. If they have the trust of the staff to say, we will not use this to micromanage you, we're going to use this for purposes to make your life easier, they're very open to it. So far, we've, like I said, we've been talking to 7 of the top 15 US hospitals. We're talking to probably all the top NHS hospitals, with some of those deploying with us. And none of them have raised this fear. And in fact, the one thing with one of the first hospitals we went to, what they did is they did a session with all of their staff. They brought all their staff in a room and they did a big presentation talking about what we're doing. And it was called Working Smarter, Working Safer. And they did this big presentation. At the end, they did like a poll, like asking, would you rather us not embrace this and keep it as it is? Would you rather that we try to hire, but that's going to be delayed by X many months? Or would you rather embrace the technology and hope and get things to run smoother? And over 80% of the staff said they'd rather work with the technology.
Wow.
Because you have to also think about this. The hiring, everybody's first thought would be, oh, the hiring is probably what they want, right? And that's true. Sure. But you have to think about every person you hire, there is an overhead. Like you have to train that person. What if they leave? What if they're not what you expected? And that's a really difficult process that these people have gone through over and over and over again. That's burning them out too, And so embracing technology has not become like a dirty word anymore. It's become more of like,
Yeah.
okay, we want to do this. It's going to help us as long as you're not doing certain things. And that's where we work with unions already to talk about this. We've already had sessions with union reps saying, how do we get this to make it aligned with what you guys expect? And so far, we haven't had a problem.
Real. So that's breaking down the barriers around, sort of the innovation in AI that we sort of touched on across sort of health and social care. So really
I
good
think people are
example.
getting normalized to it. I think people
Yeah.
are getting it's in our everyday life now. It's not something
Yes.
that's like this
Yeah.
like, futuristic sci-fi thing anymore. And that's made a big difference. And I also think that, coming back to the COVID times, it just changed people's opinions of saying we need to change the way we work,
Yeah. No, absolutely. And like I say, it's been embraced in other sectors. So why not health and social care ultimately?
Exactly.
Good. So look, bringing back sort of full circle, and thanks for the insight there. Obviously, just keen to understand your opinions on what makes a great entrepreneur.
Yeah, what makes a great entrepreneur? This is going to be a controversial one, I
Apart
think.
from don't sleep, yeah.
No, I mean, it's fine. I mean, I'm a master of not sleeping right now because I have a newborn son in the other room as well. That's
Oh,
3
feel the
weeks
pain,
old.
yeah.
So I like to say I've got 2 newborns right now,
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I think the real thing is, first one is what makes a good entrepreneur is realistic optimism. And I know it's a controversial thing to say on this, but I think that you're going to face a lot of adversity. And if you can't stay optimistic, or you approach everything with a very pessimistic attitude, or you only look at the bad, you will never survive it. You'll either talk yourself out of it because there's a potential risk or whatever, or you'll burn out and be depressed, and you can't function at your full capacity, which is holding you back anyway. But realistic optimism, which means stay optimistic, but be realistic about things may not work out, and you need to think about what are all the potential pathways and how you can solve that. The second thing I think is, do not underestimate the value of that early team. Go pick those right people, and you will have company builders. You don't want to be surrounded by people who are not company builders. If you are surrounded by people who are like, they may be amazing engineers, they may be amazing people, they may be, but if they're not waking up every morning self-driven to just go get it done, I mean, that's you're not going to be able to move as fast as you would, and it might sit on your shoulders. And that's not the place I want to be. I want to be surrounded by people who are pushing just as hard, if not harder, than I am.
Yeah. I mean, one of I've asked that question several times, and summarized delegate to elevate, in terms of obviously, delegation of tasks, and getting people that are better at various things than you are. So I think that sort of summarizes it nicely. And then obviously solving a problem that exists, and always being open to, I suppose, opportunities, and pivoting with regards to sort of feedback that you're getting from the from users.
And this is one thing that I would also go with is, or like I'd like to add to this, is the feedback from the users, and the like, make sure you're building the right things. At some point in a startup, you have to take leaps of faith to get to a point, because if people haven't thought about it yet, sometimes they're not going to be able to think about the potential of it, right? Until you get to a certain place where you've crafted the story well enough to get them to see the potential. But what I always like to say is having strong opinions held lightly, which means go in, do your research, figure it out, and when you start to see all these like lines and dots connecting, get a strong opinion about it. But when somebody comes and they challenge you or they disagree, don't hold on to them because of ego. Be ready to let them go very quickly, and then regrasp onto a newly formed opinion that's taking all that context into play. And I think that that's something that all of my founding team have done really well, is we embrace that, like, strong opinions held lightly, so that we can really adapt and be agile in the way that we go.
Good. Well, look, Thomas, many thanks for your time, and great insight into tech startup, and all the best for the future.
Thank you very much, Ben. It's a pleasure.
And to the listeners, it'd be great to hear your views and opinions on the future of AI within health and social care. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed Talking Tech Journeys, and we'll catch you next time. Good company and colleagues in a career make the journey more rewarding. If you did enjoy, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps us reach more listeners like you. Don't forget to follow and join the Talking Tech Journeys the podcast group on LinkedIn, where you can join in debate and message us directly if you'd like to be considered as a guest. have any questions, comments, or topic suggestions. You can also email ben.whiteley@bpmtech.co.uk. Until next time, enjoy